What would make ordinary men disguise themselves as Mohawk Indians and destroy an entire ship's cargo in the dead of night? This is the shocking story of the Boston Tea Party, 1773. But before we begin, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that changed history. Boston, Massachusetts, a thriving colonial port, loyal to Britain, but restless. Beneath the calm of the harbor, tension was brewing. Taxes, trade, and tyranny were about to collide. For years, British taxes had tightened their grip. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. Each one drained the colonies and fed London's coffers. And now came the Tea Act, the final insult. The Tea Act of 1773 gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales. It meant colonists could only buy tea from Britain and pay the king's tax for the privilege. To the colonists, this wasn't just about tea. It was about control, about freedom. And in taverns across Boston, anger was boiling over. Tea had become a symbol of British domination. Each cup poured was a reminder of submission. But soon, that symbol would be shattered in the most unexpected way. In secret gatherings, a group formed, the Sons of Liberty. They met in shadowed rooms, by candlelight, planning resistance and daring the impossible. At their head stood Samuel Adams, fierce, unyielding, a man who believed words had failed. Action, he said, was the only language Britain would understand. In November 1773, 3 ships docked in Boston Harbor. The Dartmouth, Eleanor, and Beaver. Their holds were filled with East India tea, hundreds of chests of defiance. Governor Thomas Hutchinson ordered the tea unloaded and the tax paid. The colonists refused. They would not fund their own oppression. Thousands packed the Old South Meeting House. Voices shouted, fists slammed on wooden benches. Boston's patience was gone. Only rebellion remained. December 16th, 1773, the deadline. If the tea wasn't unloaded, the British Navy would seize it by force. Time and tolerance had run out. Over 5,000 people gathered that night. Samuel Adams rose and spoke just 12 words. This meeting can do nothing more to save the country. Those words were the signal. The room fell silent, then erupted. The moment Boston had been waiting for had arrived. Dozens slipped into the cold night, donning feathers, blankets, and war paint. Ordinary men transformed into symbols of resistance. They moved through the streets in eerie silence. No shouting, no music, only determination. Boston's fate walked beside them. 3 ships rested quietly under the winter moon. Guards stood watch, unaware that history was about to storm their decks. With a single shout, "Boston Harbor a teapot tonight!" The men charged aboard. Hatchets flashed. The rebellion began. Tea chests split open. Leaves spilled into the icy harbor. Crate after crate, 342 in total, destroyed before dawn. The scent of tea filled the harbor air. No blood was spilled. No one was harmed. But the message was unmistakable. Freedom had found its voice. When one padlock was broken, they replaced it the next morning. This was no riot. It was principle, pure and deliberate. As dawn rose over Boston, the harbor shimmered brown with floating tea leaves. A silent sea of defiance stretched toward the horizon. Some cheered, calling the men heroes. Others trembled, fearing Britain's wrath. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. When word reached London, the reaction was swift and furious. King George III called it treason. The empire would strike back. Parliament responded with punishment. The coercive acts, closing Boston's port until every pound of tea was repaid. Boston was to be made an example. Ships sat still. Merchants starved. Families went hungry while soldiers filled the streets. But Boston would not beg. Word spread to every colony. Virginia, New York, and Pennsylvania sent aid and supplies. For the first time, the colonies stood as one. What began as protest was now aflame. The Boston Tea Party had united 13 colonies under a single, burning idea, liberty. In Philadelphia, leaders gathered. They debated, planned, and pledged to resist Britain together, no matter the cost. Across the colonies, people whispered about Boston's courage. It wasn't just tea they dumped, it was fear, and fear never returned. Britain believed punishment would break them. Instead, it forged them into something far stronger. A nation in the making. In barns and taverns, men cleaned muskets in secret. The colonies weren't just angry anymore. They were ready. Riders like Paul Revere carried messages through the night. Each mile galloped was another heartbeat toward revolution. By 1774, rebellion had spread like wildfire. Talk of independence was no longer treason. It was destiny. The tea had sunk, but its meaning rose high. That single act became the seed of the American Revolution. In London's newspapers, the colonists were branded rebels, but in the colonies, they were something greater. Patriots. That night, the harbor reflected more than moonlight. It reflected courage, and a world about to change. No blood was shed, no gunfire roared, yet the echo of that night thundered louder than any cannon. 3 years later, those same voices would sign the Declaration of Independence. The Boston Tea Party had lit the fuse. Today, Boston still remembers that night. A museum, a harbor, and a nation, all born from rebellion. Sometimes, revolutions don't begin with gunfire. Sometimes, they begin with tea. They risked their homes, their lives, their peace. But they won something far greater, the right to be free. The ripples of that night still move through time. Whenever people stand against injustice, every peaceful protest, every act of defiance, carries the same spirit born that night in Boston Harbor. Many who took part never revealed their names. They carried the secret proudly, because their acts spoke louder than fame. The empire answered with ships and soldiers, but they could not silence the idea that had already set sail. The colonies awoke, from tea leaves to freedom banners. A nation was stirring. One harbor, one night, one act of rebellion that changed the course of history forever. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more cinematic history. There's always another moment that changed the world. Up next, the shot heard round the world. Because the Boston Tea Party was only the beginning.